talking about the present Chief Minister and Biren Singh, I wrote Singh tried unsuccessfully to paper over tensions between the three major communities in the state, the Naga, Kuki and Meitei. But so basically, it was possible to see, even long ago, 6 months or a year ago, that there are problems, and those problems still exist. In any other state, especially in an opposition state, in West Bengal, for example, if somebody throws a stone at a passing car, they want precedence. The chronology is clear. What happened and what led to what is fairly clear and well established.
You're almost
And
talking like our Home Minister.
if Bangladesh cannot retain at least the semblance of secularism, and I say semblance because I know it is only a semblance, but at least that effort is not there. If they become over.
In this episode of Podcast with Professors, we have Mr. Samrat Choudhury with us. He is a journalist who has traveled and written extensively about Northeast India. Now, I belong to Northeast, and for me, Northeast is always so special. So when I came across the book that Mr. Samrat Choudhury has very recently written, Northeast India, A Political History, I could not help but invite him to come in our show. And he was very kind enough and gracious to come in our show and discuss with us about his new book, about Northeast, his experiences from traveling across the Northeast, about NRC, how it has affected the people of Northeast, and a lot more. Watch this conversation in entirety and you'll get a good understanding of what Northeast is about, the sensibilities of the people of Northeast. Here we have for you Mr. Samrat Choudhury.
I guess both of you meeting for the first time. So George is a colleague here at the business school, and we teach together. And we are great friends. I think over call I'd mentioned you how this podcast, the genesis of the podcast, how it started, right? So we talk in a lot of topics. Then suddenly we start feeling that it's too much of us talking. Let's bring in more sanity in the conversations, and that's how we started inviting guests. So Samrat, thank you so much for accepting the invite. I think I told you already. I saw about your book in a WhatsApp status of a student of mine. Okay, he had put that.
I'm so glad to hear that actually.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly, and what really touched me was that it was about Northeast. And I belong to Northeast, and I guess George has also spent some years in Northeast, right, George?
Well, my childhood years, first 9 years of my life were spent in the Northeast, like the extreme Northeast.
Arunachal.
Arunachal Assam border.
Right. So we, both of us, I mean, one commonality that binds all three of us is that we have a very strong Northeast connection. And for you, much so because you've traveled, researched, written. So your experiences are much more vivid. And this is something that we want to explore in this particular episode. So, Samrat, why don't you start with your book first? Can you tell us what this book is about? How did you, the idea behind the book? What is the genesis? Can you just take us through the journey of this book?
So actually this book, this is Northeast India Political History, this one came about in a sense in continuation of things that I was already doing. Basically, I had moved, I left Northeast many years ago. I was working in Delhi, Bombay and Bangalore. And I was in Bombay editing the Asian Age Bombay edition. And at that time, I was invited to Delhi for a conference. And it was just an invitation to attend. I was not even presenting a paper. I went because I had a free weekend, and so I just went to attend. And it was about Northeast India. There were a lot of global people who work in the field, well-known experts, people like Willem van Schendel, for example, and the organizer was Sanjay Hazarika. So I went. This was in Jamia, and at a break during the conference, I ended up chatting over tea with Preeti Gill, who is an agent, literary agent, publisher turned literary agent. And she mentioned to me that a major publisher was looking for somebody to write a book on the Brahmaputra. So So I thought it was impossible. I had a full-time job. I was in Bombay. This is the other opposite end of the country, so it looked impossible. So I said, I'll think about it. And then I thought for 2 days and I was really tempted. I said, yes. I thought, let me jump in and I'll figure out how to do it once I have dived in. And so that's what I did. I dived in and I used to take breaks. I used to go bunch all my leave together and then go and do one long journey, starting from the McMahon line through Arunachal. And so I started doing the research alongside my job. After a few years, while I was working on this book, I began to re-engage with the novel. So the re-engagement happened as a process because of my journeys, which happened because of that book, my previous book, The Graded River. And so by the time I finished that book, I had ended up working with Preeti to do another edited volume because this was a travelogue and I was not really going to touch the politics in that book. But as I was traveling in Assam, the NRC was going on, and the whole thing of what was happening was all around me as I was traveling. And so basically, I ended up re-engaging with the political issues also because I am fundamentally primarily been a journalist on my life. But I left it out of my Northeast travelogue, which is the Brahmaputra book, and I ended up doing an edited volume on the insider-outsider issue in Northeast India. So that was the next book. But the material had accumulated. So there was material and there were ideas and there were things to do. This particular book happened because I was at that time, so after I wrote the manuscript, as luck would have it, the publisher who had commissioned it rejected the manuscript of The Graded River. Meanwhile, I was in London on a Chevening fellowship. So I approached the publisher of Hearst, who really liked the manuscript. But he said that this is written for an Indian readership. We have to do a lot of work to make it comprehensible to the people who are not aware of the issues. So anyway, it didn't go to Hearst. Eventually, he ended up asking me if I would like to write another book on Northeast India, and he had something like this in mind, and so we had a discussion, and I ended up eventually writing this. So that's a long answer to a short question, but that's the whole story.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So we want to know. So I want you to take us what this book is about for the viewers. What is it that covers in this book, right? That's one part of the question. The second part is you talked of NRC, and I want to understand from you since you've traveled during the time when this was going on, your ground experiences of it, your views. I mean, just from someone who has experienced that part, right? So that's something we'd like to know from you.
Experiences writing this book and experiences about traveling through Assam during the NRC. Two separate things. So, the travel through Assam at that time, as I mentioned, I was working on the Brahmaputra, and so uh, the whatever interactions I had at that time, because I was not focusing on it, I was focusing on the river and the travel journey. They were incidental. So, for example, in Dhubri, Gwalpara side, I bumped into people. For example, we hired an auto and went around the place, and the auto guy's name was not there in the NRC. And so then conversations happened, but they were incidental conversations. I was not researching that topic at that time, and so they only served to uh, sort of bring me back in a sense to Northeast because, as I said, I was living in Bombay and had disengaged over several years living in other parts of the country. I had become a bit distant. So it brought me back into the issues. But beyond that, so I did write journalistic pieces then, but I did not really have any hardcore ground experiences because I did not go looking. I went the opposite direction. I went to the river. And so it was a different space that I was in at that time, mentally, and in my research. When I started engaging with this, right, but it brought to mind the issue of the insider and the outsider being a very dominant theme throughout the region, and so that book happened, the insider outsider book happened. And when I started working on this involved basically a lot of archival research, and so not not a lot of it is primary. Most of it is actually secondary sources because my purpose was to write simplified and potted, easy to read narrative with little, one chapter each on all the 7 states, because there is no other way that you can actually write a single narrative for the whole of Northeast India. I can't think of any. I've heard historians, I am not a professional historian, but professors of history, very well-known professors of history, who said it can't be done, that it's impossible. And I understand why they said it. So basically, my thing was to just do, brief potted histories for readers who may not be familiar with the entire region. They may be from the region or they may be from outside, but even in the region, as you would both be aware, it is vast and very diverse. I mean, after all, it is depending on, even now the place of Sikkim is always a thing that comes to mind as an afterthought, but the official region is 8 states. And 8 states, if you start counting from Kashmir, from Kanyakumari, you reach Kashmir. If you go in a northwards direction, you can reach all the way from Kanyakumari to Kashmir by counting 8 states. So it's a vast and diverse region. So this is just it's meant to be an introductory and readable popular history of the region, and it's basically putting together simple, brief accounts of the paths by which each of the constituent states of Northeast India got to the basic political map of where they are right now. That's the journey. Maps and administrative structures. That's basically the journey.
Right. So now coming to the NRC question. Now this is something that is extremely heated. I mean, it's very sensitive to the people of Northeast, right? And those of us who come from that region, we understand what it is. People who stay in the mainland, I mean, beyond Northeast, may not totally understand what it is. For them, it's just the headlines and some debates on TV, some news articles on newspapers. But for people in Northeast, because it also affects not just the particular states where the issue is on, it also affects the other states where people reside. I mean, the fabric in a way is being hindered, right? I mean, and it is very sensitive, right? Even the people who are not going to get directly affected by it also have stakes in it, right? Just with the very structure of how we are, and there are already fault lines that are there in this part. So I want to understand your take on this, on NRC, and how do you see this panning out? I mean, based on your experiences, the way since you know this region so well and the people you've interacted so deeply, what's your sense of this?
It was a bad idea from the start, and I had my doubts from the start. The first time I heard of it, I thought, before it actually, before it hit the headlines, before anything happened, I wrote about both NRC and CAA. My family is a refugee family. My parents grandparents on both sides were displaced by partition from what is now Bangladesh. So it touched, raw emotional chords in my family, among my immediate family members, and even for me personally. So, but the thing is that I realized the moment I heard it that it was going to be problematic in Northeast India, and that has proven to be the case. They did it in Assam, spent thousands of crores on it. People died just trying to provide those documents from 50 years ago. At the end of it, it has been rejected by every single party, every single, all the people who really wanted it. ASU rejected it, BJP rejected it. It was done by, the present dispensation. It happened with Ranjan Gogoi, who is now member of parliament as chief justice. So everybody who was involved in it, it was the people handpicked for the job. And eventually, some of those handpicked people, now they have been driven out of Assam. The person who conducted it is now facing police cases in Assam. Right, the guy who was the NRC commissioner, what's his name? I'm forgetting suddenly. So basically, it's been a disaster. It's a complete failure, and this is after all ideal circumstances and best efforts and maximum money put in and everything. It cannot be done. Right now, you have a further problem because right now in Manipur, they're asking for an NRC. Imagine trying to do an NRC in Manipur. You're going to break the country. Basically, what they have done is they have touched something and the fire has been lit. Northeast India was peaceful. It had become peaceful. It was progressing. And then everything is going smoothly. There is no need to light a fire. And then you light a fire. And after you lit the fire, you don't know how to put it out. That is exactly where we are now. Manipur, who is responsible, and who is going to put the fire out, and how? There's no answer. They are demanding NRC. They have been demanding NRC. You think it's a simple issue? You are looking basically at places where international borders have been drawn in the recent past. So you are looking at a place where there are many multiple nationalisms within the country, like little nationalism, sub-nationalism as it's called. Plus there are countries neighboring which have their own nationalism. Plus you have Indian nationalism, you have Hindu nationalism, you have many kinds of nationalism. You've got a situation where a complete mess has taken place and nobody knows how to solve it.
Great. Samrat, that actually brought out a lot of emotions. I mean, I could see your body language, the way you moved forward while you were talking about it. I know there was a lot of emotion attached with that answer. I want to sort of simmer that emotion down a little and
Right.
ask you a slightly different question. It's from what we were discussing a little earlier about your books, right? So you wrote the Northeast India, a political history, which is, I think, the latest. You had the Braided River, the journey along the Brahmaputra, and the edited book, Inside Outsider, Belonging and Unbelonging in Northeast India, right? So, I mean, those are very deep insights, right? Looking at Brahmaputra as a river, as that source, it becomes the largest river. I mean, I have memories of my childhood when I'd seen the sea earlier in Kerala and other places, and then there was once we were crossing across, and we were passing by some place where the Brahmaputra was flowing, and I felt that that was just like the sea, right? Because I could not see the other bank. People do not realize, most people do not realize that a river also could be that wide, right? But awesome books you've written. Now, when you spoke about the Northeast India, the book Northeast India Political History, you said that you used a lot of secondary data, also secondary information. As a curious person, I wanted to understand. There were times earlier when people used to spend hours and hours in libraries to do secondary research. Now, a lot of secondary research is available online. For writing this book, what was the proportion of offline research, online research, and how did you combine the two? I mean, are there valid online sources that a genuine author like you can use?
Well, so I had to use a lot of online for multiple reasons. Firstly, I'm not attached with any institution, so there are problems of access, whether it's online or offline. Secondly, a lot of it was done during the pandemic, and so basically, I was forced to sit at home and do it. Luckily, at that point of time, Internet Archive was you know giving away books for free, and I actually made donations because I felt bad I was downloading so much. But I really trawled the Internet Archive, and I got a lot of things that I might not have found otherwise. Just kept on looking and kept on looking, and I found very old books. So the secondary sources that I'm referring to are old books, and some of those are like their books which have had major roles in shaping the political history of the place, one way or the other. For example, I found a copy of the first Assamese grammar. Okay? So it was there in the Internet Archive, and I could find it. So so you can find books which are uh, sort of from the 1800s also, and just have to keep looking, and it's there. Uh, and I used JSTOR also, JSTOR. So that was also useful. I got actual papers. A lot of books I just bought. I just bought them, and like I said, sitting during the pandemic, I just ordered them whatever I could get from Amazon or whatever online sources. Sometimes from because they're small publishers, some of them directly from the publishers. And so I built up my own collection, which is right here next to me. And so basically, it was a combination of various things. And some stuff I already had, like from my previous work. So as far as you know, familiarity with the place is concerned, I was already familiar, and so the rest of it I put together from multiple.
So, since we are talking of the books that you have written, and we are academicians, and writing forms a very integral part of what we do, right? I mean, many people outside tend to think of academicians as people who come and teach in the class, but at a university level, this is like a very small portion of the entire things, gamut of things that we need to do. But writing has to be one of the larger chunks of it. And both of us here are curious, and we discuss a lot about writing as well. So I want to know from you, Samrat, since you've written so many books, so I guess over the years you have perhaps have developed a process, right? So how is it that whenever you start, so I want to understand from you, right from conceptualizing of an idea, right? I mean, it comes from different ways, but whenever you have an idea in your mind that, okay, this is something I'm going to work on, what is the process like, right? The gestation period, and then once you put the pen on paper, or say you first type your first word, how do you structure it? What is the process? So in a way, I want you to give us a one on writing for anyone who wants to aspire to write a book. Yeah.
Uh, I have generally written only for publication. In other words, I have never written anything which I did not know would not be published. I already knew that something is going to come out, and then I started working on it, because that was the way that my journalism training built it up. That I would write, I would work on something, and it would be published. And so even the books were actually books that typically, for anybody who's interested in publishing in the trade books rather than academic books, I can share that the usual process is that you have to send a synopsis and your first 2 or 3 chapters and the chapter division to the publisher. And it nowadays it's increasingly that it helps if there is an agent who will connect you with the publisher, literary agent, because they get a lot of things. So unless somebody puts it, their inbox might be full, they may not even notice or reply. And so once you have some response that yes, we can get this published, then then the interest really builds up. That okay, now I really have a project, and this is going to come out, so I have something to work on. And so after that, for me, the thing is that of course one has to spend some time gestating the idea, thinking about it, but the idea keeps changing as you work, because new things you discover, right? When you start, you know only a little, and then as you go along, you find more and more. So the flexibility has to be there to keep roughly to the broad idea, but to change and modify and improve as one goes along. And the only secret of getting a book done, honestly, is to sit every day at your desk and do it. And there's no other secret to it. It's sheer hard work and discipline. You just have to. It takes a toll, because you have to leave other things. You have to carve out that time when you won't do anything else, and when you are not going to allow it to anything to interfere with your writing. And that once you are able to find the time and get used to being in that mind space, then day after day, month after month, year after year, because it takes years, that sadhana, discipline, that is what will get it done.
I recently heard author mention that when one writes a book, there are usually 3 drafts. The first draft is for yourself, where you're writing everything that you think you want to have. The second draft is for the editor, where the based on the editor's suggestions, etc., you sort of you make it for the editor, so that's for a second person out there. And then the third draft is what actually goes out and gets published, because that has all the editor's inputs, and it is created for the reader. How many drafts did you have for your books?
Well, I wish I had more drafts. That is actually the right way to do it. One should do 3 drafts, and that's the minimum, honestly. I mean, you should do 3 drafts. But basically managing the deadlines, because once you have a contract, you have a deadline. And especially with the case of this book, it was first published in London by Hearst. And so the British have a different system, and they are also very particular about their deadlines. So they brought out in their brochure that it would be published on a certain date on a certain year. And so I was locked in. There was no wiggle room. So for this book, I wish I had a lot more time than I did. I ended up having a baby just as I was about to get into the edits of this book. And so you can imagine trying to juggle babysitting with editing. It was far from ideal. Anyway, one got it done, whichever way it had to get done. But basically, 2 to 3 drafts is ideal. And it is true that first you write what you want to write, then you send it, and then the edits come back, and then you work on it again, and then you send it back. I did 5 proofs of this. So basically, while I could not do the 3 full drafts, I compensated by doing more proofs.
Right. Wonderful. So now, okay, so now, Samrat, I want to get into more into the Northeast, the current issues in it, right? And let all the emotions come in because all of us are attached to this place. We want great for this place. Let's start with the current issue that is going on. Okay, the Manipur issue. I mean, it's chaos. It's chaos. I mean, people who do not even do not. I mean, here people cannot even imagine what is going on. The people, it's complete distrust. I mean, people just two communities just cannot see eye to eye on each other. I want to understand from you, where did you go wrong? Where did you go wrong? I mean, this is not the first time the communities are clashing, but this time it has taken a very different shape. What's your assessment of this situation? Where did you go wrong, and what needs to be done? More importantly, to bring back peace in the region.
See, my sense of it is that it was building up for a long time. In fact, my book, which was written long before any of this happened, I submitted the manuscript in January. And the chapter on Manipur ends. Let me see if I can find it right now. Because even at that time, I could sense that things are not okay. So, right at the end of my chapter on Manipur, what did I write? I wrote that I'm talking about the present Chief Minister and Biren Singh. I wrote, Singh tried unsuccessfully to paper over tensions between the 3 major communities in the state, the Naga, Kuki, and Meitei. But several crucial, mutually interconnected issues are not really resolved either in the Imphal Valley, the surrounding hills, or in Nagaland or northern Myanmar next door. Manipur remains suspended in an uneasy peace, prone to descending into fraternal conflict, just as it was 1,000 years ago in the days when clan warred against clan and tribe against tribe. So basically, it was possible to see, even long ago, 6 months or a year ago, that there are problems, and those problems still exist. The problems big underlying problems, for example, the Naga peace process, which involves the hills of Manipur. It's been talking since 1997 and still actually unresolved. And that was already there. If you look at the Meitei insurgencies, basically all the major insurgencies in the Northeast, they've concluded ceasefires and they have come into peace talks. The Meitei groups are the only ones who are not in peace talks. They refuse to enter the peace process. So slight difference there. That means that there is an ideological position. With the cookies also. Actually, the situation in Myanmar and the resulting migration from there, which is exaggerated, but there was some migration, and the civil war in Myanmar had already started, and that borders. Only people who have never seen a land border think a border is the Great Wall of China. But the border is, you can't wall the whole country in really. So borders are always by definition almost porous. They're lines on maps. And so it was only a matter of time before something spilled over. You have similar communities on both sides and similar populations. So it was possible to gauge that that whole region is unstable. It was just a state of unstable equilibrium, and it took only it took one match and the whole powder keg blew up basically. And now that it has blown up, I don't see how it can actually be resolved. Maybe they'll be able to. They haven't yet succeeded, but hopefully at some point people will at least stop killing each other. I mean, that's all that one can hope for right now. I don't see how the basic political issues can be resolved because the demands are completely contradictory and on 3 sides. So basically it's the imagination of nations and nationalism, which is, in my opinion, to blame. Everybody has their own map and their own expansive idea of a territory that they think they own, and anybody else in that territory should be ethnically cleansed or reduced to second-class citizen. Everybody's map is overlapping with everybody else's map, right? And those are the small ones. Actually, on a larger scale, also we saw it in the sense of China's map overlapping with India's map. So if you have so many overlapping territorial claims, you'll never see peace. I don't know how they can be resolved.
Okay. You were mentioning about borders. I have been to the Petropol border between West Bengal and Bangladesh, right? There, even though you don't have that sort of militarization as much as you see on our western borders, but still there's that formal border on the road, right? But when you see on the sides, you realize that there is hardly anything. I mean, it's a porous border. Anybody can walk across, go 500 meters down, and then it's just a walk across from one country to the other. So, picking on the three groups that you mentioned in this, right? So, Nagas are also one of the large groups there, and then there is that entire demand for Nagalim, right, as they call it. Now, what stance did the Nagas take in this conflict, and what is the situation for the entire Nagalim demand um, on ground these days?
Well, so I haven't been to the ground since this began, mainly for personal reasons, baby and
Maybe.
things like that. But I did notice that the Nagas have been neutral all through. However, there was one very strong statement which came just recently, a few days ago, from the United Naga Council, which has previously and currently also, which is known to have close ties with the NSCN. And there was also a statement from the NSCN, the main insurgent group. And they have basically reiterated that there cannot be any settlement with the cookies which causes them territorial loss. And so basically you have a situation where the old Naga cookie issue is also resurfacing. And so on the one hand, you have the hill-valley divide between the Meiteis and the two tribal communities in the hills, the Nagas and the Kukis. But on the other hand, you also have the overlapping territorial claims of the Nagas and the Kukis. And the Nagas, they've demanded implementation of their, framework accord, which was signed several years ago. I think how many I'm forgetting, but quite a few years ago, between Mr. Modi and the NSCN's TH Muiga. And so they want whatever was agreed upon. They want a final resolution to their peace process, which has been going on since 1997. So I think what is happening is that they're also now sort of starting to put a little bit of pressure, and they're also perhaps getting a little bit restless because the situation there is obviously something where they are afraid that either they will be sucked into the fighting or some sort of deal will be done between the Meiteis, the Kukis, and the government of India, which is to their disadvantage.
Right. So, given the situation, how do you see the way the central government has reacted or handled the situation? I mean, state government in a way has completely failed, right? The less we say is better it is for the state government as far as the state government is concerned. But even the central government, at some stage, I feel the central government was much late in reacting there. Okay, and even the way they handled it, I guess in for any other state, perhaps they would have completely aligned. Set back the state government have completely taken control. The president rule that we say. Do you think that's a case? I mean, that's a route that the central government should have taken. What do you think could have been done differently, or do you think that's the maximum or the best the government could have done as far as the center is concerned, given all the forces, the power that the center has?
So let me talk first about what they did right to be fair and give them their due. They sent in the army and security forces were airlifted as soon as the trouble started. And so they tried to, use the security and military, the various security agencies and the military to quell the problems once the fighting started. So the military was already on the ground within 48 hours. But they did not take political steps to match the security moves that they made early in the day. And as you rightly mentioned, in any other state, especially in an opposition state, in West Bengal, for example, if somebody throws a stone at a passing car, they want precedence, right? And in many opposition states, that same sort of standard of what should count for precedence rule applies. But in this case, you have a state of civil war which is going on month after month, and it is literally civil war. The Assam Rifles is saying so. They themselves are saying that we are using drones to monitor the buffer zone, which is basically a no man's land. So a de facto border has been created. There are people with automatic rifles behind sandbags on both sides. That is a war. And 4,500 assault rifles have been, and other weapons have been stolen from state armies. That is a state of war. It is something which is unprecedented in the history of modern India. Even during the heights of the insurgencies, we actually, I don't think, had this. There were one or two episodes which came close, but they were very rare. And so, in a situation like that, for the state government to carry on as if nothing is happening, and for the central government to allow it to carry on as if nothing is happening, is a dereliction of duty. It is dereliction of duty on the part of the Home Minister and the Prime Minister.
A quick follow-up on that. We all know the Northeast had its share of extreme insurgency. I mean, there were various states had their own issues, and then the sort of the matters mellowed down a little. You started getting fewer news updates about issues in the Northeast, and then now again there has been this fire which has lit up. Um, your candid view on this. What is the possibility of external influences for something like this? And let me address the elephant in the room, could China have a role in inciting any of this?
Well, in this particular instance, which we're talking about, the chronology is clear. What happened and what led to what is fairly clear and well established.
You're almost
And
talking like our home minister.
yes,
As soon as that word comes in.
he advised very rightly, our chronology samjhiye. So basically, in this case, what happened is clear. We know that there was a certain order about reservations which sparked off the violence, and before that things were simmering. They were not happy, but there was nothing like this. I mean, it was there was at least seeming normalcy, even if underneath it there was some unhappiness. So that court order was given by the High Court of Manipur, by the acting Chief Justice. I don't think that can be blamed on China. And subsequent events also, for example, the memorable things which have happened, like that the women being paraded naked. I don't think one can find logically or reasonably a Chinese hand in that incident. You'd have to really stretch your imagination quite a bit to discover a Chinese angle. So, a lot of reporters have gone there, from various parts of India who have no stake in that. They've talked to people on the ground. A lot of people have given interviews. For example, Karan Thapar did a series of interviews with leaders from Manipur, and they've stated their positions. I mean, it would be stretching credulity. It would be really, stretching logic to say that they are all working for China. They're stating their own positions. So basically, I don't think that the cause or the inception, the beginning of it had anything to do with China. But of course, it is a fact of political history around the world over time that when there is a situation of extreme unrest in one part of a country's territory, then an unfriendly neighbor may find an opportunity in that unrest. So it is not, if there is continuing unrest and the government of India is not able to uh, perform its dharma, its duty to to do the right thing there, then we cannot blame our enemies if they fish in troubled waters.
I totally agree here. And but here, what I see, I mean, when I talk to my friends who are from Manipur, it's a crisis on their existence, it's a crisis on their identity. That's what people are so emotional about, right? It is when it comes to hunger, when it comes to existential threat, and when it comes to identity threat, there's nothing that human beings cannot do, right? And this is about this. It's about identity and existence of people. The emotions are very high, and I mean, we can always blame foreign hands in supplying arms and all that, but that's a different matter. The point is that these are emotions. I mean, these are emotions which have come from basic identity and existence, and that's what is driving them. That's what is making it so difficult. Nothing else can stop this unless those emotions are being sorted out, where people are made secure that no, your land is safe. We are here with you. I mean, that sort of comforting, which is a very challenging thing, is easier said than done, but it's going to be very difficult. And I see the challenge that even the government faces. I mean, you're right. I mean, they are doing a lot of things, of course, to be fair, but it's not an easy problem to solve. I mean, I don't see anyone in that state solving it so easily. It will take time. It will take time. But drawing from this, and what I want to take, I just zoom out of Manipur and see the larger northeast picture. So I come from a state, Tripura, and we also have that same hill valley divide. Okay, so if you know, 30% of the population are the tribals who have their own ADC, where it's their land and no one can buy land there. And we have the valley, right, the plain lands where predominantly are the Bengalis. Okay, and yes, the tribal population also reside there, but it's predominantly the Bengali population, right? So I see that hill valley divide there, and for a very long time, the demand from the tribals to go for a separate land. So right now it's about Tripura land in my state, and the elections are won by parties which essentially talk of a Tripura land. I mean, which essentially talk of a separate land. And this is not just about my state; it's also true about many other northeastern states where infiltrators come on the thesis that we need a separate land for ourselves. How do you see this demand? I mean, from an outside, I'm saying, how do you see this demand? Do you think giving a separate state would solve anything? Even for the tribal communities, if you have to think for their welfare, do you think that would solve anything? Or how does one address this? Your take on this?
Well, the you know what so what happened? I mean, let me address it at a theoretical level first. And so basically, what we see in the case of the Manipur conflict and in the case of these demands for statehood, and there are other issues also where it is implicated, is basically the idea of a community forming a nation. It may be so it is an idea of nationalism. It may be at a small scale or a big scale, depending on the size of the community. But the idea is that if you have a community which shares an identity, then it is entitled to its own nation or state or some form of territorial unit. And so the negotiation is about what the size of that territorial unit will be and what kind of administrative authority it will rest from its, whatever is the present structure at the moment. And that is something that we have seen throughout, right from the beginning. For example, all the hill states came out of Assam. Manipur and Tripura were the only two pre-existing princely states, but all the others were carved out of Assam because of the hill state movements. And so that goes back a very long way. It goes back to the 50s in some sense. And you've seen the Naga struggle for independence from 1947 onwards. And so that is also gone on and on. And so the hill valley divide that you mentioned, partly it is there because of, uh, uh, essentially just the geography. And that is something which, for example, Professor James Scott a professor at Yale has written about, and he's mentioned this the hills starting from Northeast India and going all the way up to Vietnam. A lot of them were non-state spaces in the sense that they did not have state structures in the hills. So their entire political history tends to be different from the valleys. And the populations in hills and valleys tend to be different, not just in Manipur or in Tripura, but actually all the way you can find similar patterns being repeated throughout Southeast Asia. And the British actually formalized a lot of these. So sometimes the British are blamed, the colonial administration is blamed for creating a hill valley divide. Uh, in a sense, they drew boundaries and so they drew an inner line and then they formalized methods or modes of interaction. And that drawing of borders hardened identities. They brought in the census, so the hardening of identities, the fixing of identities happened in the colonial period. But then again, a lot of things happened which we uh, continue to accept and work with. Those identities which emerged, we have not rejected those identities, right? The modern identities that we have, the linguistic identities or the tribal identities, many of them are modern creations. They emerged only in the colonial period in the way that they exist now. Nobody is rejecting those identities, right? So we have to see that while we blame the British for certain things, we continue to work with what we have inherited. And so the political division between hill and valley, uh, that is a pattern you'll find repeated on and on. As far as the creation of smaller states is concerned, I come from Meghalaya, and I think maybe it's been good for the local communities of Meghalaya that they got their own state. So I would not dismiss the notion of a Meghalaya state. After all, Shillong was the capital of undivided Assam. Shillong as a city lost a lot because it became capital of only the small state of Meghalaya instead of almost the whole of Northeast India. But for the local Khasi community, for example, I think it was good for them. It was not good for the local Bengali community, right, or the local non-tribal communities, but it was good for the local Khasi community. They gained from it. So there will always be gainers and losers in any such transaction or interaction. Uh, the demand for smaller states did not end even within Meghalaya, for example, with the formation of Meghalaya. There is a demand for Garo land, which actually saw insurgencies just for Garo land. And there's been a fight for Boro land. So, so those go on. And as long as you have the idea of each community having its own territorial space, unique territorial space where it's going to rule, these problems will continue. We have to accept that every community cannot have its own country. We just have to dismiss the idea that everybody has to have their own state or nation or whatever. And we have to also find ways in which we can accommodate minority aspirations because otherwise the process will continue. It is inevitable.
I had a comment on this. Economists tend to say that economics has a solution to many things, right? And there are people who say if you divide a state further, form smaller states, the amount of the access to funds that you'd have and the access to central funds and your own income generation capabilities, that itself is the antithesis to the splitting up of these states, right? Because if you're small, you have much lesser resources, you have much lesser potential to growth. Therefore, if people understand that economic argument, then they would not demand for this because ultimately, who doesn't want to prosper, right? On the economics argument, a related thing is about migration, right? Um, Economists also tend to say that migration tends to settle a lot of things because when there is intermigration, people get assimilated, and mainland India has seen some migration from the northeast. primarily in the form of maybe students coming to Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, etc. But that has been just a very small percentage. Um, the migration from mainland India to the northeast, that well, with the Bengalis who historically been gone there, they have also created its own share of problems. Of late, what I've seen and I read somewhere was that earlier migration out of the northeast used to be a lot to the north and to I mean east obviously was there, but more to the north. Of late, migration has shifted to the southern states, right, because of all the problems that they were happening in the north, and the southern states have been found to be far more accepting, right? What is your comment on this migration? I mean, have you examined any aspect of that? Migration out of the northeast and the new migration into the northeast.
So, well, my book has been one on history. So I've looked at it in the not in the current context, but in the historical context. And in the historical context, migration has been uh, very significant in the history and the politics of the place. And of course, even now, it continues to be so. Whether you talk about NRC or whether you talk about the current situation in Manipur, both are related to migration. Uh, the thing is that uh, we have to remember that a lot of these places were part of the same country, right? I mean, all these borders, all all of the borders in that region. First of all, Northeast India has only 2% of its land connects with the rest of India through the Siliguri corridor. The remaining 98%, approximately speaking, are international borders, and so all those borders, they bear the names of colonial officers. So the one with China is, of course, the McMahon line. The one with Burma it was drawn successively by three colonial officers. Pemberton, Boileau Pemberton was the first. Uh, Maxwell was the second, and I think Johnstone was the third. So there were three colonial officers who were involved. Then, in the case of Bangladesh, which is the India's longest land border, that is also Radcliffe Line, right? So Cyril Radcliffe. So basically, you don't see these spaces being actually physically separated one side from the other until the colonial period. And so when we talk about migration, we have to remember that these were ancient migratory corridors. Human beings have been moving in and out both through the passes of the northeast and the northwest, two ends of the subcontinent. They are historical zones of migration. Human migration has been happening through those places for millennia, thousands of years. So now suddenly somebody comes and draws a line on a piece of paper and says, okay, we will stop it. You keep trying. They've been trying from then to now. From the British to today, they drew those lines, and those lines are creating problems because the unruly realities of the ground bear no resemblance to the neat pieces of paper in the offices in Delhi or London before. so we can keep trying. We can keep trying. If you look at the actual geography, in the long duration of history, what they call the long dury, the the whole zone is one. The Himalayas in the north are the northern barrier, and the Bay of Bengal in the south. And between that, you have a lot of rivers connecting them. So basically, it is a connected zone from the Himalayas to the Bay of Bengal. The entire region in between is historically and geographically interconnected. And to try and separate it, you will keep struggling. Any administration, any time, modern technology, ancient technology, they will still struggle. That is what we are seeing.
Right. So I want to take another important question for you. When we see Northeast, one of the things that has become like a reason for tussle is basically the community identity, right? I mean, that's predominantly that is. But of late, I get a sense that even religion is coming into picture right now. I mean, off late, that's also another thing. I mean, predominantly, we did not see that. Yes, there have been a lot of conversions happening, but religion as an issue, I see more of it as a political issue. But even beyond political, as in as a social issue, I see in some places even religion is coming into the picture. How do you look at this? Right? Because now we have another complexity adding up to the already very complex social structure of the social fabric of the society in the Northeast. How do you look into this issue coming up? Do you really see this as the coming threat when it comes to solving the different issues there?
Yes, I agree that religion was not previously so much of an issue over there. It was always other things. And to add another volatile dimension to an already volatile mix is definitely worrisome. Uh, the region as a whole, because it is so diverse, it may have different, uh, uh, it may play out differently in different parts. But once you add religion to the mix, then uh, so basically you have a situation where a lot of what happens is going to depend on what happens next door, which has been the case because after all, Bangladesh is a large and populous neighbor, and so their histories have been interconnected. From plains to hills, there have been interconnections, and one thing has often triggered something next door. And so I think the immediate political thing would be that right now we are looking at a situation where the forthcoming elections in Bangladesh, for example, may have an important role to play in what happens in Northeast India subsequently. If it cuts both ways. If Bangladesh cannot retain at least a semblance of secularism, and I say semblance because I know it is only a semblance, but at least that effort is not there. If they become overtly or outrightly Islamist, then it will have repercussions on the other side of the border as well. Similarly, if India cannot retain at least a semblance of secularism, then it will have repercussions on the other side of the border as well. And people there are watching what is happening here, people here are watching what is happening there. So we may have separated with partition as countries, but we have not delinked completely. The connections are still there. And what happens on one side will have ramifications on the other side.
I totally agree. In fact, I'm glad you brought this point up about Bangladesh. Yes, I totally agree. In case the present dispensation is removed or loses the election, I see a lot of migration happening in the Northeast, especially of the Hindu population in Bangladesh, right? If the other dispensation comes. And that's a real fear. We have our known acquaintances and relatives in Bangladesh, and it's already happening. That migration is happening, and people, in a way, are fearing for the next 3 to 5 years. I'll see a lot of migration coming, both legal and illegal, and more so on the illegal part that is happening. And I think this as a real challenge, especially the states that border Bangladesh, and my state happens to be one of them. So we see that influx happening a lot. Though that's totally true. But on a slightly brighter side, before we end, we are getting on time here. Uh, on the positives, I see one of the focuses of the government on infrastructure development. Right, I see at present a lot of the focus on infrastructure is going on. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that predominantly it has been assumed that since these are, like as you rightly point on, 2% of Northeast is connected, the chicken snack with India, 98% on international borders. So building up infrastructure in those areas might be problematic since these are border states. Right, but right now that perspective is changing and a lot of infrastructure is happening. Uh, this is one positive I see. Can you help us with any other thing that you see going right for the Northeast at this moment, and maybe in another maybe 5 or 10 years, in the next decade, if I say, what are some of the challenges that you anticipate and your prescription to deal with those challenges? And on this, yeah.
Yeah, I agree that the infrastructure development has been picking up, and it's a good thing. It's actually happening, I suppose, because of the Act East policy, and so there is a realization that among the states in Northeast India also that there economic destinies are connected with their neighbors, and those neighbors may be across the international border. And so the connectivity becoming a buzzword, connectivity has become a buzzword, but on the whole, it's probably not a bad thing. The problem is that there is a disjunction between the desire for economic connectivity and the fear of migration. And so basically, you just want uh, very, there is a huge fear. Politically, the rhetoric is of one kind, but the economic policy is pushing in another direction. So that contradiction needs to some extent to be handled or resolved. Uh, I think the other positive that I see is basically that for Northeast India, while we do see, even in the present situation, things are very bad, for example, in Manipur, but it has been astonishing that none of the the parties in the conflict have spoken out really against India or even against the present BJP government. They have basically been uh, talking about settlements, but within the present constitutional structure. So, so on the whole, in the Northeast, I think the period of mental separation, emotional separation from India has actually been reversed. Now the demands are for integration. And so people will tell you, why is Northeast not there in Janagana Mana? So the cry is for integration. They're not saying that we don't want to be there. They'll say, why is our history not there in the history of India? But earlier they would say, we are not part of India. Why should our history be part of India? So it is an opposite. So I think the larger, integration, the problem of integration has largely been worked. And now these remaining political issues, if they are handled properly, the economic situation will definitely improve because the natural uh, connectivity of Northeast with its with Southeast Asia and with the wider world through the port of Chittagong was there and it's still there.
Well, I'm not an economist, but I still support the economic view that economics solves many things. There are cultural issues that aside, but tourism could be that solution, right? The beauty of the Northeast is still alien to a large part of India. I mean, I'd say 99.9% of India has not seen what the Northeast has to offer, and increased tourism could integrate both sides of Bangladesh, I would say. Right. So, great. On that note, I'd like to thank you. Thank you, Samrat. It was an awesome discussion, and it brought back. I mean, I was sitting here recalling all my childhood memories of what I'd seen passing through various places in the Northeast. It was awesome talking to you, and your questions, your answers about the books, about the way you've written the books, those also have been insightful. Somewhere I'm taking mental notes. Hopefully, one day, me too.
Just
Sure.
one last question from my side.
Yeah.
Samra, so what is the next book about that's going to come up? Are you already in talks or?
No, I
Yeah,
have no idea what I'm going to do next. Absolutely no
but
clue.
hopefully it might be again about Northeast. We need to know more.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much. At some point in time, we'd like to connect again. We'll invite you again, and hopefully you'll have a bigger platform as far as our own podcast is concerned in terms of viewership. But thank you so very much for this. We'll see you again.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Samrat.